Hello everyone, today I'm going to talk about the new second edition of the Batman miniature game. They've just released the rulebook last week. I've had a chance to look it over. I haven't seen a lot of stuff online about the changes, so I thought I'd make this video to go over some of the things that I thought were important. The rulebook is free. You can download it from Night Model's website. I encourage you to do that. But if for whatever reason you just want a quick overview, or you don't want to read, you're doing something and you just want to listen to someone drone on about some of the changes that have happened, that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to talk about some of the things that I think are the most important, especially as they relate to the crews that I'm currently using. So let's get right into it right away. First off, a nice change. They have it online. You can download it for free. I think that that's great. I've bought the rule books already, but I don't mind. I think it's a good way to get people interested in the game. If anyone remembers the first rule book that they released online, that was a real mess. That was really difficult to read, to understand, and to print out. I'll get to that point in a little bit. But I think they've done a really nice job with this. The game is still complex, but I think someone has a much better shot at learning from this new online PDF than they did with the other one that they released. And even with their actual rulebook, I think they did a better job laying it out and explaining what the game is like. I also appreciate that, the first PDF that they put online kind of bugged me because the way they laid it out graphically, there was tons of color and black ink, and it just cost a fortune to print. I printed like 5 pages and I completely ran out of ink in my printer. It was a real pain. So for those of you who actually like to have a physical rule book, this is a lot nicer. They were just a lot nicer with how much ink they use on each page, so it wasn't quite as costly for me to print out. I still had it done at a shop, but if you want to print it out on your home printer, it's not as exorbitantly expensive as that first one was. So I just want to thank them for doing that. It's just whatever, I don't know if it was done intentionally or what, but thank you to the graphics department for not being so ink heavy this time. I also think it's a good idea to separate it into 2 separate PDFs. You have the main rule book, which covers all the rules, and then you have the compendium, which just covers special rules, traits, weapon abilities, effects, that kind of thing. Those are the things that you really look up most of the time in an actual game. Those are the things that you want to search through really fast, and it's nice that they're not wedged in the middle of a rule book. You've got this separate document, and it's really inclusive. It has, as far as I know, it's got all the current rules that every model uses, so it's real nice. And so you can just keep that one around, and if for any of these traits or things that apply to particular models, you can look that up. And for the main rule book, which you probably don't need to reference that much in an actual game once you get the hang of it, you can just keep that to the side. So let's get straight into it and see what some of the changes are. In some ways, the biggest change and the smallest change is the conversion from centimeters to inches. For the most part, this really doesn't seem to matter. I mean, instead of 20 centimeters, now it's 8 inches. Instead of 30 centimeters, now it's 12 inches. For the most part. It just doesn't make that much difference to me. However they want to measure it, that's fine. Now, this is just for as it relates to the actual rules. If you have a special rule on your model, for example, TV flashes, Speed Force Lightning, that's still measured in centimeters. So some of your special rules on your cards might still actually use centimeters. There's no actual conversion in the book that says if it says this range, now you change it to this range in inches. You might actually still need to measure certain things in centimeters if you have a special ability on your card that references centimeters. So, I have a tape measure that measures in both inches and centimeters, so that's no problem. Just keep it in mind, don't throw out tape measures that measure in centimeters. You may still need them for this game. The good news about this is that they haven't actually changed that much. The rules are basically the same. The things that worked before should more or less work the same now. There are a couple of sections that have changed substantially. Movement is one of them. And I think that's a good change. Movement was really complicated, and it was a little tricky to do. It took you out of the game a little bit because it got very technical, and there were things that you would think that a character should be able to do, but they can't because of the letter of the rules. And so they cleaned a lot of that up. For example, you have a basic move, which you had in the old game. You could move 10 centimeters, and now you just move 4 inches. That's fine. But now you don't have running anymore. And I don't miss the running so much. I thought it was an interesting mechanic. You had the ability to spend a movement and a special counter, and you got to run in a straight line 20 centimeters. And that was neat because you had to kind of line up a way to go. You needed to line up a clear path for a model to travel in, and they got this burst of movement. But you did get into some weird situations. Like if there was a small piece of terrain in the middle of that run, you couldn't move around it. You couldn't arc yourself or anything like that. If it was in the beginning of your run, you could use a movement die and kind of sneak around it, or if it was at the run, at the end of the run, you could do that. But if it was in the middle, you were kind of stuck. And in a couple of games, I felt kind of bad because I was looking at a model from my opponent that would be running towards something, and I'm thinking, can they really cut around that? Is the angle quite right to allow them to go in this straight line? But I didn't want to be a real stickler for this kind of thing because it did take away from the game a little bit. Well, they've gotten rid of all of that. Now you spend movement counters and you move extra distance. And I'm fine with that. Again, I thought the run mechanism was interesting, but it was complicated and it led to some weird situations, and I don't really mind seeing it go away. The same with spending movement counters to get random amounts, especially random centimeters. Now it's just a flat 2 inches. That makes planning pretty easy. It makes it faster. You don't have to roll that extra die. And especially when you rolled one die and you got 1 centimeter and you think, for this I've got to go and I've got to actually measure 1 centimeter and move my model for that. It's barely worth it. Now you don't have that problem. 2 inches is a substantial amount, and so that's good. And so they've changed a lot of the traits that affected those dice rolls and that kind of thing. Tireless, fast, all that stuff. So to my mind, I think that's a good change. I think they've cleaned that up a lot. Also, they've gotten rid of the movement counter requirements for moving over obstacles, for jumping, all that kind of thing. Those weird rules that required you to spend movement counters in the middle of your regular movement. You don't need to do that anymore. I especially love the change to climbing and the elimination of the spring into the air rule. I never understood that rule. I didn't know how it was supposed to be used. And I always liked the way the Marvel Universe Miniatures game addressed climbing. It's just impaired movement. You had to pay double your movement allowance in order to go up, in order to go straight up something. So if you wanted to climb something that was 2 inches tall, you had to pay 4 inches of movement. It was really simple. It made for a much more dynamic game that moved along much faster and simpler. And that's how the Batman game works now. So I'm really happy about that. Also, you don't have the weird situations where you're running and all of a sudden you have to stop because you have to pay another movement counter in order to move over an obstacle. That was just kind of a drag. I didn't care for that. And that's all gone. The rules are now you have a basic 4-inch move for every model that you have, and you get that for free. For every movement counter that you spend, you get to move an extra 2 inches. In order to climb up, you just pay double movement. Jumping is still a little complicated. It's basically you can jump whenever you like, and it's impaired movement. In order to jump 2 inches, you spend 4 inches of movement. It's pretty straightforward. I don't mind it. You can drop down things. If you drop further than your movement allowance, then you take fall damage as before. I just think it works. And you get a lot of the same abilities that you had before. For example, acrobats add 1 inch to their basic move. Characters with the fast attribute, they gain 2 inches to their basic move. Speedsters add another 2 inches to their basic move. Tireless characters can use a special counter once per turn as a movement counter, that sort of thing. Probably the next largest change to the basic rules are how pings work. Before, you got a different kind of saving throw depending on the kind of material that was between you and your shooter. They've really simplified this, and I think it's a good idea because during games, I often had to stop the game to try and look up what sort of material gave what kind of ping. Like light things would be 6+ and heavy things would be 4+, all that kind of stuff. And it slowed the game down. It was actually fairly confusing, and it forced you and your opponent to make judgment calls depending on what the piece of terrain that was in the way would count as. They got rid of all that. Now, if there's any kind of object that is between any part of one model's volume and another model's volume, then there's going to be a ping, unless the shooter is right next to it, leaning over it or shooting, from it, that kind of thing. So I think that works out a lot better. I think it's much more clear. The downside is that it's going to make pings a lot more common and a lot more significant, I think. I tend to play on game boards with a lot of terrain. And so all you have to do is have one thing in between you and your target, and that target gets a 4+ ping, which is significant. That's one of the higher level pings that you could get in the old game. I think this is a good change, but it does alter a couple of things. You only get one ping, no matter how many things are in the way, and it's always a 4+. Also, the thing that is now taking the hit, taking the ping, it doesn't take any damage. So if you're shooting at someone through another model, another character, then you're not actually going to hurt that model anymore. You're not going to break the street light, for example. It also has changed. Now, this is kind of why I'm not as enthusiastic about this change to the rules as I could be. It changed the way the shooter rule works. Before, shooter could ignore one ping while they're taking a shot. Now, there's only ever going to be one ping, so that kind of doesn't make a difference as far as that and some other skills that allow you to ignore pings entirely, like scope. So what they've done is they've said, now you can ignore pings if the model has shooter, but only if they're within 8 inches. And I think that's a lot less useful. So my TV Green Arrow, now he's great at ignoring pings, but only when he's really close to something, which isn't where I want that model to be. Also, if there is a ping in the way, which again is pretty likely, that 4+ ping is kind of a big deal. That means half of his shots could go away. And so I think the overall effect is to make shooting less effective, especially if your opponent is actively taking cover. Speaking of my Green Arrow crew, the next biggest change is the Speed Force rules. Now, in general, they've stayed the same, but there is one really major change, and that is that now a speedster can use however many powers they want in a turn, so long as they have the speed counters to pay for them. So for example, my TV Flash has his Speedster 5, so he can have 5 Speed Force powers. So he could use a Speed Force power that costs 1, and he could use a Speed Force power that costs 2, and he can use a Speed Force power that costs 3, all in the same round. Before, only a Speed Force Master could use 2 powers in a round, and now you can use basically an unlimited number of them so long as you have these speed counters to spend, and I think that is a really handy change. I think that makes speedsters a lot better. So for example, I can move 4 inches, and then I can move 8 inches, and then I can give myself something like fast combo or muscle growth. I can do all that without any kind of paradox roll, and it gives you a lot of options to mix and match these abilities. And that's for any speedster, so it really benefits my Reverse Flash, who before could just do 1 Speed Force power, and that was it. And I'm really excited about this, because now that allows him to do several small Speed Force powers, and then do maybe one that has a possible paradox, and of course he's got a rule where he can ignore the effects of one of the paradoxes once per game. So suddenly he has a lot of options to do many different things in a turn, including something a little bit riskier, where before I would think to myself, well, I can try this one risky thing, but if I paradox it, even if I don't actually suffer the effects of that paradox, I've still wasted all my speed abilities for the turn. But now I don't have to do that. Now I can do some lower level stuff beforehand and then go on with that. Anyway, I'm rambling a little bit, but the end result is that this makes these speedsters really versatile, and they have a lot of options for combos, and I'm really excited about that. So Speed Force Masters can now use speed counters as other action counters. So if they've got some Speed Force counters just lying around, they can use them in attack or defense or anything like that. And that's pretty handy because, honestly, my speedsters mostly just sit on objectives, so they're not using all their Speed Force counters in a round. Granted, they're not using all their action counters in a round, but now they have that additional option. Other than the change to the ping rule, combat is almost exactly the same. There are a couple changes. For example, it used to be that you couldn't fire a ranged weapon if there was a model within 5 centimeters. They've changed that. Now it's actually volume to volume. You have to be in contact with another model in order for you to not fire your weapon. So that's a pretty minor change, but I don't mind it. They've also changed some of the special combat maneuvers like push and grab. If I'm reading this correctly, now you can't push or grab with a weapon. You can't do your weapon damage. You have to do an actual unarmed attack. And I think that makes sense, and I think it benefits characters who don't have a weapon, like Flash, like Batman, that sort of thing. So you're not going to push someone with a katana. And I think that's fair. I think that's reasonable. These characters can still push, but they have to attack like an unarmed attack. They've changed the reach rule. So now characters with reach, instead of it being like 3 centimeters or something, now it's 2 inches. And so that's a pretty far reach. So now my John Diggle with his taser being able to wander around and zap people 2 inches away, that sounds pretty good to me. So those are the changes to the main rules, and then you get into the things for actually running a scenario, stuff like sewers and lampposts, and there have been a number of changes to that kind of thing. So first off, you no longer roll for sewers and lampposts. You get the maximum 3 every time. Now again, my Green Arrow crew likes having lots of lampposts on the table, so this is good news for them. Also, because they don't get destroyed when they take a ping, that's handy. They still can be hit and damaged with a defense of 2, and so long as they take like any damage, they can get destroyed. That's fine. None of that's changed, but I do like it. Sewers, I'm not as fired up about the changes for these. Now, granted, sewers don't get used a lot in the games that I've been in. Every so often, someone will pop into the sewers and it'll make a difference, but really that's pretty rare. So now it's a lot easier. It's probably a little bit too easy. All you need to do is spend a movement counter, hop into the sewers, and you immediately teleport to another sewer somewhere else on the table. And I'm not sure why they made this change. There are probably a number of reasons. The sewer rules in the old edition were kind of cumbersome, and people sort of avoided it because they weren't terribly useful. But me personally, I feel like it just takes away a little bit from the game to have someone suddenly warp across the table because they're crawling in a sewer. I don't understand why that's faster than using a sidewalk, But yeah, I'll play it. I'll see how it goes. I feel like I'm just visually, just narratively, I don't like it right now to have these things work like teleportation pads. But I'll give it a try. We'll see how it changes the actual game. Probably not a whole lot. Now, there are a couple big changes to objectives. First on the list is riddles have gotten better. Now they reward more victory points to the people who solve them. And I like that because I think people avoided riddles simply because they didn't do a whole lot. I think the other objectives have barely changed at all. Loot is more or less the same. Ammo, Titan, they're more or less the same. Now the big things for me are they appear to have gotten rid of some of them. They've gotten rid of safes, they've gotten rid of the Joker canisters, and they've gotten rid of the bat signals. Now, I personally don't mind seeing those things going away at all. I did not really love the way that those worked in the old rules. I don't think they really got them quite right. Now, they did replace the Joker canisters with something called Ace Chemicals. And actually, they added quite a few new objectives beyond that. And these look interesting. they don't look like they're going to break the game one way or the other. Some of them seem kind of silly. Like, for example, there's a fire drum. I don't really know. It sounds like a, like a burning barrel that, you see hobos warming themselves in front of. I don't know why people would fight over those. But now those are objectives, and I think it works fine. They have small rules where if you manipulate them in your turn, you get some small benefit. They have ace chemicals. I think you can get poisoned attack. Fire drums. I think you can get a fire effect. You have a LexCorp high-tech stash. That's interesting. You can get a random piece of technology. And you have medical supplies, which I think is a really good objective. I think that makes a nice one. You can get a narcotics dose, which gives you the desensitized rule, which makes you, it means you don't lose willpower for taking damage. And I actually like that rule there. I like that you don't actually heal damage. I like that you simply ignore the effects of the damage that you've taken. So I like all those objectives. I like the ones that have gone away. I don't know if they've permanently gone away or not, but I like this refocusing on some of these other objectives. I think it works really well. The last thing I want to talk about is the crews themselves. They have gone through some changes, and I'm going to mention those just briefly. So Law Enforcement, Batman, and Green Arrow have all been combined into one crew, the Brave and the Bold. Really, this doesn't make much difference at all. There are some characters that could only work with Batman, and now you can bring them in to a Green Arrow crew. Like, for example, I thought it would be a good idea to have Katana in my Green Arrow crew. And now I can do that, because formerly I think she only worked with Batman. But generally, it's pretty minor stuff like that. Like, now Batman can have John Diggle and his crew, or Green Arrow can have Alfred. It's pretty minor. The Gotham City Sirens replaces the Poison Ivy crew. Again, I don't think that changes a whole lot. You can bring Harley and Catwoman in, which you could basically do before, but as it works out. They've changed Scarecrow to Militia. Again, I don't think it changes much of anything, but it does mean if you want Arkham Knight or Deathstroke leading your crew, you don't have to call yourself a Scarecrow crew. You can call yourself a Militia crew. I think that's fine. Organized crime is a bit of a change that now encompasses Two-Face, Black Mask, LexCorp, actual organized crime. So you got a lot of, and Mad Hatter. So you can mix and match a lot of these people back and forth. I think if people want to theme themselves off of using one of those crews, they're going to do that. I don't think there's going to be a lot of people having Black Mask with some of the flunkies from the organized crime, plus Spice from Two-Face's gang. I think people are going to want to theme themselves a little bit. I could be wrong. Maybe there's some real advantages to mixing and matching these guys. I don't know what that would be, but I'm fine with it. There don't seem to be the Amazons. They released the crew, they released all the models, and I think they had Batman stats, but I didn't see them on the list, so I don't know what happened with them. The Gorilla City people, Grodd and them, they've renamed them to Central City Villains, which confuses me a little bit. I don't know if they're going to roll Grodd's group into the, what do you call them, Flash's Rogues Gallery people. We'll have to wait and see what happens with that. Another interesting change, they've changed League of Shadows to League of Assassins. So, again, I'm not steeped in the lore or anything, but I thought League of Shadows was what they called it in the comics, and League of Assassins was what they called it in the TV show. So I would love if they refocus a lot of those models to follow the TV show a little bit more, but I think that's unlikely. So I'm not sure why they made that change, that small name change. And last, I don't see anything about teams. No Birds of Prey, no Teen Titans, no Suicide Squad. Suicide Squad really surprises me because they did that big box set, and there's a lot of Suicide Squad members. So I'm not sure why they don't have rules for teams in this document, but we'll wait and see. I don't know if it's coming out in a later document or if they're going to do a supplement or that kind of thing. Anyway, these are the big changes. I think generally it's going to be the same game. It's not dumbed down. It's not simplified. They may come out and release like clearly on the new character cards, they have like the little box that has like the simple rules. So they're going to have a quick play set of rules in some way. This is not them. This is the whole enchilada, which is nice. It's the same game that I like. It's the same game that I play, and I think I'm going to have a lot of fun with it. I think it's generally an improvement, and I'm excited to see what comes next. So, thanks for watching. I will see you on the next one.